All right, so for the roundtable today, I would like to introduce Seattle University's president, Eduardo Peñalver. This is going to be a very short version of his CV. He was a Rhodes Scholar and legal scholar with a distinguished career in property law and higher education leadership. And prior to being named Seattle University's president, Eduardo Peñalver served as the dean of Cornell University's law school. His research explores how property law creates or reinforces communal bonds and how property rights mediate the relationship between individuals and communities. His book, Property Outlaws, co-authored with Sonia Katyal, explores the vital role of disobedience within the evolution of property law. So, President Peñalver.
So we have some questions that were submitted to the QR code, and we'll draw from those. So first question, and I'll let you all just sort of volunteer. How does education adapt, changing how we teach and produce professionals for an AI-enabled workforce at pace? And what help do we need from the business community and from government in accomplishing that?
I have a pitch to make for Seattle University to add something to their curriculum. So I think that because you have a unique program in software engineering and computer science, obviously, and a strong focus on ethics, I think no undergrad or master's computer science student that I know is required to take an ethics class. Mm-hmm. So you end up, coming out of, if you learn about it, you learn about it on the job, if at all, and frequently you're in situations where it's up to you, right? And if you have some legal colleagues who are empowered, they might advise you on what's ethical or what's legal, but very often you're flying blind and it's all about the KPI and I think as we've seen even with Meta, so many of the missteps were driven by sort of ethics blind thinking around KPIs. And so I think, won't solve any problems immediately, but maybe, educating people on AI ethics, I think would be super, super helpful.
What about our two? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, no, if you have somebody else. I think that at times, I actually don't think we need to do anything all that special to get to have an AI-ready workforce. I think that the usual problems in the US education system are the things that need to be fixed, and they will help us prepare the workforce for the future regardless of which jobs are most impacted by AI. And I'm partly influenced in my thinking on that because we have dramatically misread the impacts of technology on the workforce every single time a new technological innovation has come along. ATMs didn't put tellers out of work right away. They actually increased the number of tellers at first. But 25 years later, when other advances in e-banking and things like that came along, and nobody at that point was thinking that that would put tellers out of work, that did put tellers out of work. Likewise, everybody was saying 10 years ago that by now we'd be having self-driving semi-trucks on the street and all of the Teamsters would be out of jobs. I have a feeling that we're going to be told that that's 5 years away for the next 50 years. So I personally would not get too tied to what are the specific steps we need to do to make an AI-ready workforce. Instead, what we should be doing is having an educational system that places more of an emphasis on lifelong learning and adult education and vocational education so that people can make a good living regardless of whether or not they have a college degree, and they can retrain if a technology does come along that puts them out of a career or radically changes the nature of their job. And that will help everyone regardless of whether it's AI or other technologies or other social changes that lead to changes in the labor market.
Thanks. Anyone else want to weigh in on this? What about the way that, I don't think anyone has addressed the way that AI disrupts the educational process itself. There's a lot of work being done now on students' use of AI, essentially cheating, but cheating themselves ultimately. Any thoughts about the kind of help that educators need to grapple with that fundamental change in the dynamics of the educational process?
I actually had a teacher that really put this into perspective for me. I was very staunchly not using AI for anything education related, but maybe that's just me trying to preserve my own jobs and dreams as an academic. But this professor recommended basically teaching AI as a friend. that is not necessarily knowledgeable in what you want to know. So in this case, I was taking an economics class, and so the level that he put it at was if you would ask it basic definitions of terms that you would otherwise be able to look up in a dictionary, that's probably a good use of AI if you were going to use AI. But if you're going to ask it complex analytical questions, you wouldn't do that to somebody who wasn't in the same class as you, or maybe was getting a worse score in the class than you, something like that. So to treat it at the levels that you would treat somebody with lesser experience than you that you're relying on for assistance. And that really helped reframe to me the way that AI could be assisting people in education in terms of speeding up the learning process without undermining the learning process.
Okay, second question from the audience. How can responsible AI respect human rights where rights like privacy are inconsistent, or so inconsistent across jurisdictions, even across US states?
Thank you. You know, that obviously speaks to not only privacy itself, but you know, any other, say, human right or principle that we might want to protect about humans. In a sense, I think the Catholic justice approach of subsidiarity makes a ton of sense, that we would try to have some of those important decisions made at, as it were, the lowest level of organization possible, because we do want, right, community understandings of what constitutes privacy, what that even means, and it's, as it were, value in relationship to other types of human values might differ depending on what region of the world we might be from. And then, of course, there might be some obvious examples where we're not seeing that kind of careful implementation at that regional level, and then it's appropriate to rise to the higher level of governance up to the international level. That's just my basic approach.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that one? Okay. Third question, how can we encourage putting more technological power in the hands of historically overworked workers, late adopters, to better distribute the opportunity generated by new technology? Sonia?
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, so I actually, I want to speak to this question because I think that as an academic, and we were talking about this earlier, as an academic, we have the luxury in some ways of being able to kind of take in a lot of different perspectives and kind of analyze sort of where we stand on these issues. And at Cal, I served on a committee that talked about the university-wide use of AI. So I had a lot of time to think about these questions. And I think my general feeling is that I think AI will open up like a lot of incredible opportunities to educate a much wider body of individuals who do not have access to schools like this and do not have access to, kind of individualized tutoring instruction. I think AI in this way can be really, really, really transformative. I mean, I see it every day when my kids ask me a question and I'm like, I don't know the answer. And then I run and quietly ask ChatGPT, how do I answer this question? But I mean, not all the time. Occasionally I do know the answer. But I would say that so I do think that in that sense, it is kind of amazing, the opportunities for education. But I also think that as an academic, the one thing that AI cannot teach you, right, is I think what is actually most important, which is literacy about the limitations of AI, right? And so for that, you really need to come to places like this to learn critical thinking and ethics. And, I feel like there's a strong argument to be made about the need for humanities type critical thinking when we think about AI and the kind of ethical commitments that we make to each other when we use these systems, knowing about the limitations and the problems that they have. And so I sort of view my role as an educator as kind of making both of those possibilities ever present in my students' minds, both the limits and the possibilities of AI. So.
We have two over here, so why don't we...
So I think one of your, if you don't mind, your original question was about how AI can help people that are older workers who are potentially losing their vocation. I had the good fortune of being involved in a startup and also an initiative when I worked at Amazon, where we were building essentially AI career coaches. So these were career coaches that would allow an older employee to explore alternative careers, understand what educational, curricula they should pursue, who they should, because very often, this type of individualized mentoring or coaching experiences are not available to people. And so, I'm not saying these things work to the full extent of the law, but we actually tested them on warehouse workers who were being aged out. In a previous life, we were working with German factory workers who were being put out of work by, conversion from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles. So there's definitely potential in it. This is where I think there's potential in the technology. It has to be built responsibly and it has to be, privacy cognizant. But there's definitely ways that could never have been done at the scale without the use of AI. So that's just something, just as a hopeful current for the future. So.
The one word of caution that I would put on that is that historically, number one, claims that or predictions that technology would disrupt in a positive way education have usually turned out to not pan out to the degree that was initially predicted. And what often does happen, and this is what we have to be very careful to guard against, it may well be the case that it's different with AI, that the ability to deliver personalized instruction really does make a difference in ways that previous generations of educational technology did not. But what we have to guard against is the possibility that the wealthy kids end up with the good human tutors and teachers and professors. And what we end up with is the poorer kids and the kids in developing countries. And those are the ones who end up with the AI tutors as a substitute or lower level replacement for direct human instruction the reason that we keep relying on human instruction rather than, initially it was movies that was going to actually revolutionize education, and then it was personal computers, and then it was the internet. The reason that we keep going back to humans is that they really are the best deliverers of education and methods to people. So yes, we should definitely explore those things. We have to be very careful that it's not kind of like an excuse to not provide real educational services to disadvantaged groups.
Anyone else on this? Yeah, Jay?
I think the real danger of AI in education is when it's not necessarily used by students, but used against students. So things like monitoring facial expressions to make sure that students are engaged, or teachers are overworked and underpaid, using AI to do grading that might have bias built into it. But I think the danger of AI that I see in education is more how it's used against students than students using it.
Which aspects of popular media conversations about AI are more noise than substance?
So I've had my fill of Terminator conversations. So Skynet, Terminator, all of those AI is becoming sentient, it's becoming super intelligent. I think it's a gigantic smokescreen, right? So it's a smokescreen to distract people from what's happening here and now. Privacy violations, bias, all these other things. People are being distracted by it. So as a rule, in fact, our organization will not support anything that focuses on loss of life or catastrophic risk on AI just because we feel it's a distraction, right? There's other immediate policymaking priorities that we ought to focus on that are focused on the here and now. Obviously I might, regret those in the, when Skynet comes knocking at my door, but, at the moment at least, I don't foresee that. So that's I think, something I would just say. The popular media sometimes is sort of really fascinated by it, and sometimes it's skillful planting of those ideas from people who are trying to justify the enormous valuations that companies got, right? So that I think is something that you need to keep in mind.
Can I ask the question in a slightly different way? Because I share the sentiment about the driving. Yeah. I was on a Aspen Institute commission with several people from. It had nothing to do with AI. It was about declining trust in institutions, but people from Google, people from now Meta, and they were warning me that AI was going to put lawyers out of business and I should just shut down Cornell Law School. And my response was, well, when they can drive a car, which my 15-year-old could learn to do passably well in a month, then come talk to me about law. But I start with a place of skepticism. But as I watch the discourse around AI right now, I'm struck by just how much money has been poured into this technology. I mean, very, very large existential bets for very, very large companies. And it makes me wonder about the quality of information that we can really get about AI. Some of the claims that are made on its behalf are quite extravagant. So how does someone who's not a computer scientist cut through just the hype cycle that you talked about, Jay? I mean, where do you go for good sources of information about what this technology is and isn't?
I started kind of almost as a hobby learning about AI and writing and speaking on it. And originally my fear was that the Terminator was going to come true. And that's what got me into it. And like Jay, I've eventually gotten to where Jay probably has been the entire time, which is at the immediate impacts and what we need to worry about. But it was learning about what was actually going on under the hood a little bit that got me to worry about it less. That got me to worry less about the existential risk. Large language models and neural networks are not going to become self-aware.
But isn't there an existential risk that could come out of overestimating AI?
That's a great point. And yeah, I think that is I've gone from being worried about us thinking that AI could do to being underestimating AI's potential to overestimating AI's potential. And I think that there are certain tasks that you could probably have an AI system do that a lawyer typically does. Just like there are, I'm sure, a lot of educational tasks that you could assign to an AI system. There's a great paper that it's eventually going to be expanded into a book by Arvind Narayanan and Sayash Kapoor, who wrote AI Snake Oil, which everybody should read. But it's called AI as Normal Technology. And that's really, I think, the way that we should think about it, is like the internet, like the personal computer. It's going to change the way certain jobs are done, and it's going to change some jobs radically. But the way to figuring out how it's going to change each job and how it's going to change the job of a lawyer or an Uber driver, et cetera, we're probably not going to get a full picture of that in the next 2 to 3 years, or probably not even the next 10 to 15. And that but the problem is, I think from the tech industry's perspective, they don't work on those timescales. They need to generate those profits ASAP in order to get venture capitalists their returns back, and in order to keep up with the market capitalizations of the biggest companies.
Thanks.
I would say what a lot of this comes down to is also just that we really need better, or any public education on AI. And that would cause, in schools, but also in media and so on and so forth, and just a lot of different venues. And I think that would provide a check on some of the hype that we're seeing, that I think ends up becoming this straw man that people get concerned about, the idea that AI is now sentient, which was the thing that went viral a week ago. And even my dad texted me. And then it was my dad. And then I went on a little tirade about, the fact that the person who had said it, who is, one of the founders of AI, should stay in his lane. He hasn't taken a philosophy class. The nature of consciousness and all of this is happening on WhatsApp. But but I think so that would provide some check on the hype. But that made me lose my. It'll come to me. Why don't you say what you...
I was just going to say, whenever I talk to my students about AI, I always recommend that they see the film Gattaca. How many of you have seen it? I still think it's decades old, and I think it's one of the most eloquent treatments of the risk of AI that we can imagine on the silver screen.
Yeah, I think as the hype cycle inevitably, CRESS, which I think is almost, I would say, upon us. Maybe hopefully at next year's conference, we'll be talking about how to get achieve the plateau of stability after this. But I do think that a lot of folks that are entering the workforce now need to really be thinking about really measuring value as opposed to be getting delighted by parlor tricks or gee, this looks really great, and no, inspect it, see how good it is, see how accurate it is. How would you make it more accurate? How would you make it more detailed? How would you make it more predictable? I mean, those are the kinds of challenges that remain ahead of us. And some of it, unfortunately, might affect everybody's, 401ks here, is that if it enter the trough of disappointment, all of these companies that are valuations that are riding sky high will have to justify, these investments. And watching the earnings of Microsoft, seeing, what percentage of their earnings are coming from hosting versus model sales. I mean, these are the kinds of things that we as informed people need to do in order to make sure we understand where this might be and hopefully educate others about it. So,
well, we're at time. And so I just want to thank all our panelists for their insights. And then again, thank all of you for sticking with us today and participating in this third annual Tech Ethics Conference. We'll see you next year.